Hello there and welcome to the Breakfast Connect show on Africa Business Radio. It's time for us to get into our guest segment for the show. And yes, our focus today is going to be around the energy sector. And that's because energy prices represent a significant portion of our domestic industrial competitiveness and also influence energy consumption. So in our guest segment, we'll be talking trends in energy prices in Africa. And I've got Anthony Mongameli Mehlwana. He is the Economic Affairs Officer, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Addis Ababa. Hello, sir. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Good morning.
All right. So because this is a very broad topic, I'd like for us to focus first on end-user prices. That's those paid by the final consumers. Of course, they are affected by movements in commodity markets as well as by policy decisions. So tell us, please, what energy price monitoring is like at this point in Africa and how important is it, especially as more and more countries are moving away from, regulated energy prices?
Thank you for inviting me first, for inviting us as SAA. The question is broad. It can be tackled in a broad way, but I like to be specific and focusing particularly on the electricity prices. We do know that the energy sector is very broad, and some of the prices, they follow commodity prices, yes, spot prices. But let's look at the electricity prices. Our pricing. There are, the first starting point, the starting point here is that the production cost of electricity in Africa generally is very, very high. And it's made, unreasonable for, even for the, for many countries, they cannot actually, they have sort of their high cost. There are various reasons for it. The first one, one can cite is that, there are inefficiencies, in the distribution and transmission of electric power. We don't have sort of the updated grid network in Africa that is able, to evacuate and distribute electricity in an efficient way. Our grid losses, are between 10 to 25%, 25 being the highest, like international. So that's a one point. The second point is that, we, in our distribution, transmission as well as generation, we are using outdated technologies. There are very few countries in Africa that have managed in the last 10 years, to build new power plants. And most of the power plants, in Africa, particularly in the largest economies, in Africa, such as, in Nigeria, South Africa, and others, have been built in the 70s. So therefore, that technology is very outdated. Thirdly, the point, is that there is generally very poor management of utilities, in Africa in terms of governance. There's been some improvements in many other countries, i.e., where there are sort of electricity sector reforms, where they're introducing private sector. But generally, the utilities, are poorly managed, and therefore they lead, to the high prices of electricity, particularly at the consumer level. Lastly, we have sort of we don't invest a lot in maintenance and operations, and it's not enough, to mobilize resources, to build power stations, but you have to have sort of a strategy, where you focus, on operation and maintenance. So this is in short, what are the determinants of energy pricing, particularly at the consumer level in Africa.
Right. And we seem to have, so many challenges when it comes to energy resources. But then if you look at the African continent, we are rich in renewable energy sources. We have hydro, we've got solar, we've got wind, and others yet to even tap into. But yet we are finding a sustainable way to meet this growing energy need seems to be one challenge for us in Africa. And of course, you've mentioned other challenges. But then how do we meet this growing energy demand with all of these challenges we are facing in the continent?
Indeed, you are absolutely correct. We have, sort of abundance, of renewable energy sources, more than any other continent that I know of, particularly solar. And it's not only renewables, by the way. There's been a growing sort of discoveries, of even natural gas resources, on the African continent. So we have these resources, but, and then we have on the opposite side of things that we are a continent in need of energy resources in terms of transformed energy resources. So therefore, how do we transform this potential into something that we can use? This has been the challenge, that we've been facing, and it's been addressed in at many angles in different levels of the continent. I want to group these challenges into three. The first one is that we need to attract investments, in the sector. In the past or currently, many energy projects and programs, are supported mainly by the public sector. That means by the government. But that means that by your taxes. And there's been less investment by other sources, i.e., your private sector. So therefore, we need to invest in the energy sector, particularly in renewables. The capital cost of starting a viable renewable energy power plant, are very prohibitive, and therefore they tend to be, outside the abilities of many governments in Africa. So therefore, we need alternative investment.
Right.
There are countries, that have begun on this. I'm quoting some countries, particularly the wind technology in North Africa, Southern Africa, South Africa, solar energy in many other countries is beginning to pick up. That is one crucial aspect that we need to attract investment. Secondly, is a technical know-how. We are still, babies, so to speak, in the renewable energy space in Africa, particularly in modern energy. So we have also here pockets, of successes, per technologies, as I've mentioned earlier, around wind and solar, and then also now emerging, around East Africa on geothermal. So they are successful in terms of the technology know-how. So we need also to increase our technology know-how, where the governments, could support, our centers of excellence, into the subject or courses, on the technology, around these sources. And lastly, if you may, policies that we have. We still have policies that favor fossil fuels vis-a-vis alternatives.
Right.
Therefore, we need to have to accelerate the policy reforms across Africa. Also, this policy reform should be full, not partial. For instance, we have now, in many countries on the continent where the power sector reform, they mean that they are mainly focused on energy generation. Okay? Mm-hmm. But we have to look at energy in a value chain, from the generation transmission and distribution.
Right.
And then if we have a policy reform, we should have policy reforms that are actually cover all the entire value chain. So it's very, very important that we need to have to accelerate the policy, reforms in Africa.
Interesting.
I think that is actually non-negotiable.
Right. Now let's get a little personal now to the role that you're currently playing, Mr. Anthony. You have a master's degree in social sciences from the University of Cape Town, and social sciences is quite broad. It encompasses a lot of things, including energy economics. Why did you choose, or why did you decide to focus on energy economics amidst other things? What inspired the need to push for clean energy infrastructure as a way to help industrialize Africa?
Well, you'll be very sad on a personal level that I never thought, like when I was growing up, that I would be where I am.
Oh.
My father wanted me to be a doctor,
Right.
like any other sort of African family. Being a doctor, a teacher, or a lawyer. Those sort of recognized. But it was when I was in early 90s when I was doing my honors, and there was a project in the University of Cape Town where it was just before it was in 1991, 1992, just before the country gained its independence. There was a project that wanted to look at electricity access, by Black South Africans, because at that time, electricity access in South Africa, was around 32%, where almost 80% of the South Africans, Black South Africans, didn't have access. So that was a project that was under the ANC, the African National Congress, to look at it was called Reconstruction and Development Plan, to say that how do we, increase electricity access amongst sort of the Black, poor South Africans. So that's when I began as an interviewer, in the surveys that I began, to understand the severity, of energy poverty, within sort of the poor Black or low-income households. That's when that generated, an interest in me, and then I said to myself that at the honors level, I need to branch, and do sort of the energy side of things.
Interesting. Good one. So we're still talking about you now and the role that you've been playing as an economic affairs officer in the energy infrastructure and services section at the private sector development and finance division. Of course, this has given you a wide experience of energy industry, and you've worked in a number of initiatives in the last years. Now, specifically, what mistakes, would you say we are making in the energy market in Africa as Africans as it concerns energy prices? Because we've been in this journey for the longest time. And do you think that we can keep the cost of energy low enough to sustain economic growth? If you think, it's very possible, then when are you looking at this actually happening?
Well, mistakes we are making, mistakes we are learning from there. That's what I've been, ever since I've started at the Economic Commission for Africa in 2011. Also because even then, before that, I've been working in this field. Is that one first has to acknowledge sort of the positive strides that we are making.
Right.
If you look at electricity access, in Africa, you compare, electricity access in 2000. Up to now, we've increased, quite a lot, in terms of the access, through sort of innovation, policy innovation, technical innovation, and also the political will in some countries, so we've made progress, significant progress, so much. But, we still have some other sort of areas that we need to improve. I would say that those are the some of the mistakes, but I think these are the areas that we need to improve. Some of them I've touched upon, critical on them. For instance, in my field, is actually how do we optimally revamp the energy structure in Africa? Yes, it's a very, very big question that we are still grappling with. We are looking at, like we cannot do the same thing every year and hope for a different answer, because that's not going to happen. So therefore, we need a political will that will ensure that we come up with robust governance, better governance, in the African energy sector. This is very, very important because that underpins, everything that comes in. It underpins, the predictability of the sector. Predictability is very, very sought by the investors. But when they want to invest. Because if you invest, for instance, in a power plant, let's say you build a power plant of about 100 megawatt power plant. Your investment there, capital investment, may be in a region of around 5 years or 6 or 10 sometimes, for you to generate power. You just build in the technology, you put in the right systems. So it's a long time for you to be able to invest. So it's very, very important that, if we want a private sector that can invest for 10 years, 20 years, in building a power plant, you need the right policy environment. That will be, will transcend even when the governments, or political parties are changing in the countries. That will actually be very consistent. So normally in Africa, we don't have that. So that for us, is particularly within, the division that I belong, that is the private sector, development and finance, is to say, how do you create, a better policy environment and regulatory environment that will ensure increased investment in the sector. So
right.
that is a crucial issue.
Right, interesting. Now, of course, we do need, good political will, because at the end of the day, when you have private investors coming in, the first thing they're looking at, as you've mentioned, is a good policy environment that will cushion the business and make it, grow and become profitable. Oh, well, I think I'll have to wrap up the conversation at this point. Thank you so much, Mr. Mongameli Anthony, for joining me this evening. It's been a whole lot of back and forth trying to get you to be with us, and finally we've done it. So thank you very much for joining me. I do hope you'll be available for further conversations around the energy sector.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you.
All right. I've been talking with Anthony Mongameli Mehlwana. He is the Economic Affairs Officer, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Addis Ababa. The Breakfast Connect show continues in just a moment. Stay with us.